And welcome back to the David67 Celtic News YouTube channel. I'm back from my holidays, so back to usual recording circumstances and backdrops, etc. And on the nice, restful 3-day seaside break that we had on our holidays, there's obviously been an awful lot of changes at Celtic. When I left just after the Hearts 3-1 rather woeful defeat on Sunday to go off on my holidays, Rodgers looked like he was going to carry on being Celtic's manager, battle on to the transfer window in January, and then reinvigorate the squad and lead us to a remarkable comeback, double or treble, to round off a successful 25-26 season. However, on Monday evening, out the blue, Brendan Rodgers resigned or was forced out or was sacked or whatever has happened, and then a rather controversial, aggressive, attacking counter-statement made by Dermot Desmond, the majority shareholder. And then, lo and behold, next day, in comes Martin O'Neill, backed up by Sean Maloney, to be caretaker managers as Celtic look for their new long-term permanent manager, and there are a lot of different candidates for that. And of course, Celtic have tonight an important game against Falkirk, second against sixth, to try and at least keep the gap between Celtic and Hearts at 8 points, and possibly St Mirren might do us a wee favour and narrow the gap for us. And of course, at the weekend, we've got the vital League Cup semi-final against our cross-city rivals Rangers, who have had a patchy start under their new manager with one humiliating defeat and then a scrappy win over Kilmarnock at the weekend. So in the video, we're going to have a wee quick look ahead to the Celtic Falkirk game tonight, prediction of the score, prediction of the lineup, which is a wee bit difficult because I don't really know how Martin O'Neill is going to use this squad. One or two stats of Celtic Falkirk, one or two wee thoughts regarding the Rodgers departure and the way ahead, and who might well be the best candidates to be Celtic's long-term manager. So we'll start with the Martin O'Neill, Sean Maloney press conference on Tuesday evening, previewing the game against Falkirk and also answering a few questions regarding their involvement in the background to the Rodgers departure. And Martin O'Neill gave a very, very enjoyable press conference, full of friendship, full of good respect for the journalists, full of nice, clever responses. O'Neill doing a very good job of answering the questions they should answer and deflecting the questions that he shouldn't answer, and did a very good job of staying clear of anything controversial, which I think should have been a very good lesson for Brendan Rodgers, as I do think his press conferences over these 3-4 months so far this season got him and the club and the players and the board into a lot of deep water, created a lot of confusion, and if Dermot Desmond's statement is to be believed, some of what Rodgers was saying wasn't wholly accurate and may have been rather divisive and throwing other people under the bus. Very difficult to know where all this, all the ins and outs of this all is. It does appear that quite a lot of the things that Dermot Desmond said in his rather vitriolic, critical statement were backed up by other stories from Celtic insiders, but because Rodgers was the main one speaking to the public and speaking through the press and on TV, etc., it tended to be his version that was taken as being the true version because there was no counter-narrative from the CEO, the CFO, the chairman, or anybody else on the board or behind the scenes at Celtic. However, I have to say, I really enjoyed Martin O'Neill's press conference, very positive, full of praise for the players. If I was one of his players, I would have my confidence boosted. I would be made to feel that I was a good player. Martin O'Neill, kind of very contrasting to what Brendan Rodgers has been doing for the last 3 or 4 months. O'Neill bigged up the players, boosted their confidence, said they were good players. They maybe were a bit low in confidence, but the bulk of these players were the players who did so well in the last Champions League and did so well nearly beating Bayern Munich in Munich January of this year. And if I was a Celtic player, the positivity of O'Neill and Maloney would very much boost me going into tonight's game. Also, Maloney, who took the training on Tuesday morning whilst O'Neill was coming up from England, was very positive about the experienced players such as Forrest, McGregor, Tierney, Schmeichel, and Alistair Johnston, and identified them as leaders on the pitch and in the training ground, which I think is a very positive step, and giving power back to the players, where maybe under Rodgers all the power and decision making was entirely through him and not shared with any of his coaches, assistant managers, or the players. All that is yet still to be seen. Other important things that were said at the press conference is that John Kennedy has left after a long spell as a player, a coach, and then latterly assistant manager to a number of different Celtic managers. He's also gone with three Rodgers friends, Adam Sadler, Jack Lyons, and Glenn Driscoll, all men brought in by Rodgers when he took over, little by little getting rid of Celtic coaches of longer standing who had worked well under Lennon and Postecoglou before, and brought in by Rodgers some of his friends from previous jobs. Difficult to know quite what starting a lineup Martin O'Neill will go with for tonight's game against Falkirk. Falkirk game is a 7:45 kickoff tonight. Game is live on Celtic TV and will be shown in highlight version later on in the evening on BBC Scotland Sports Scene and iPlayer. Game is a home game for Celtic, 7:45 kickoff, and hopefully any fan protests and chants and banners, etc., will be minimal to allow O'Neill, Maloney, and the new start at Celtic to have 100% support on and off the pitch. And I am very, very hopeful that Celtic will get a nice confidence boosting win tonight. They, of course, beat the same Falkirk side back in August in the League Cup 4-1, with Celtic fielding a slightly lower strength side, but still very comfortably winning that game 4-1. And hopefully we'll have something similar tonight. I'm going to go for a 2-0 win for Celtic, with Celtic looking to defend a bit better and be a bit more structured in midfield and getting the ball into the box, etc. A wee bit difficult, as I say, to predict quite how O'Neill and Maloney will pick the team and set things up. I suspect they probably will keep the same 4-3-3 style framework, maybe using McGregor, Hattati, and Engels as a line of three midfielders rather than having them with one deeper and two more advanced, but we'll see how that sets up. So my prediction for the lineup tonight will be Celtic will go with a more experienced 11. Schmeichel in goals, Ralston at right back, Trusty and Scales as the two centre-backs, and Tierney at left back, McGregor, Hattati and Engels in midfield, Negrin in a free-roaming right-sided wide player role, tucking in to be a second striker. Out wide on the left, Chinyeki as a more conventional winger, and through the middle, Shin Yamada. What I really would actually quite like, one way or another, would be for Celtic to line up with a front two, possibly Yamada and Negrin, possibly Negrin and Kenny, or Kenny and Yamada, and with the midfielders also getting out wide and the fullbacks getting out wide, and having Celtic maybe a wee bit more in the mould of how O'Neill had things set up for Celtic way back in the early 2000s. Anyway, be interesting to see how things pan out tonight. However, I'm hoping and expecting Celtic to get back to being strong in defence, tight in midfield, and creating chances more freely and more quickly, and getting back to some of the pace of play that Celtic used with great success under O'Neill in the early 2000s, and particularly in the Ange Postecoglou years 21 to 23. And I am confidently going for a 2-0 win. Looking at some of the stats for Celtic against Falkirk over the year, Celtic have against Falkirk 24 wins, 5 draws and just 3 defeats. Celtic are unbeaten against Falkirk in the last 14 games, 12 wins and 2 draws. Last time Celtic lost to Falkirk was way back in March 2007. And the last time Celtic played Falkirk in the league was back in 2010, which was a 2-0 win. Falkirk don't have a good record coming to Celtic, 14 defeats and 2 draws in the last 16 since their last win against Celtic, which was way back 30 years ago in October 1994. However, the last time Falkirk did come to Celtic, it was a 1-1 draw back in January of 2010. And so far this season, Falkirk have, in away games in the Scottish Premiership, 2 wins and 2 defeats. And hopefully Celtic will add a third defeat to that later on tonight. So, just one or two wee thoughts on Rodgers leaving. I have to say, I actually wasn't terribly surprised to see Brendan Rodgers leave. I think his lack of commitment in going through with contract negotiations and new contract signings, which were proposed to him in June, July through to August. He chose to postpone all those until the end of the season, which I think is very, very disruptive in terms of long-term planning at Celtic. I think it also had an impact on the unsatisfactory transfer window in that no one knew whether Rodgers was staying or going. I think also it's quite clear that on several occasions Rodgers may well have been a wee bit misleading in his press conferences as to whether there were any negotiations, any offers, any discussions, and also a couple of points he implied that the board and Lawwell and Desmond, etc., didn't want him to stay, when, of course, in June and July, apparently there were a lot of informal and formal discussions, which made it very, very clear that Celtic wanted to keep Rodgers at Celtic for another 2, 3 or more seasons. And I think probably all the various different parties and people involved have more than their fair share of blame, and it all feels like a rather messy family breakdown or messy divorce, where you've got one side against the other, people making accusations and nasty statements back and forward, and I think us Celtic fans are kind of stuck in the middle, not knowing quite who to believe, who not to believe, whose side to be on or whose side not to be on. My personal feeling is the side that we should be on is Celtic Football Club, and be it fans, coaches, players, board members, executives, sponsors, investors, etc. Everybody should be 100% behind Celtic, moving Celtic forward and getting Celtic back this season to top of the league and a cup or two, and then next season a reinvigorated and renewed squad with a new manager, powering on to another double or treble and powering into European Champions League qualification and success. At least that's the short, medium and long-term David 67 plan. As part of that long-term plan, obviously Celtic are going to need to get a brand new long-term permanent manager. Martin O'Neill in his press conference was a wee bit vague as to how long he's going to be the interim caretaker manager. Did at times talk about weeks, did at times talk about months. I think Celtic do need to try and get the new appointee in place maybe over the course of November, so that he is in the club with 4 weeks or so at least to work with recruitment, get his plans discussed with the CEO, the chairman, board members, recruiting, scouting, etc., etc. Also, maybe get some feedback and info from people such as Maloney, Strachan, Woods, Tidsdale, etc., who've been at Celtic for the last year or two or more. Quite a number of different candidates have come forward. There is a wee poll on the channel of 4 who initially were seen as being favourites for the role. And Postecoglou coming back now that he's free of his Nottingham Forest job. Kjetil Knutsen of Bodo Glimt. He is finishing his time at Bodo Glimt late November, early December, as the Norwegian season finishes around then. Another possibility is Robbie Keane, previously a Celtic player for a short spell. Great for the Republic of Ireland internationally. Then he's gone on to have pretty successful managerial career, winning championships both in Israel and Hungary. He is thought to be keen for the job, although has not formally put his hat into the ring. Another person is Damien Duff, ex-Celtic coach, who has done well in Irish football, and was rumoured to be a possibility to become the Ireland international manager. And he is currently doing work for FIFA and UEFA, and so also would be available immediately. Other names being put forward are people such as Marco Rose and Terzic, both ex-Borussia Dortmund managers. Kieran McKenna of Ipswich, another person who has increasingly over the last 24 hours become more and more of a favourite. Uncertainty whether McKenna would want to come to Celtic or not. He's getting extremely well paid by Ipswich. At the moment, rumoured to be £5 million a year. He signed a long-term contract with Ipswich, despite the fact that having got them promoted to the English Premier League, they came straight back down and are struggling to get above mid-table so far in their return to the English Premier League. However, uncertainty as to whether McKenna would or wouldn't want to come to Celtic, and there are lots and lots of other names in the frame. My personal feeling is Celtic need to go for a manager with some experience. I think Kjetil Knutsen might well be a very, very good option. Tons of experience. He's won tons and tons of things in Norway. He's been successful taking Bodo Glimt into European competitions, qualified them into the Champions League this year. He got Bodo Glimt all the way to the semi-finals of the Europa League last season. And he's also done a great job of bringing in players via transfers and internal development, and turning them into big successful stars and selling them on for profits, which of course would fit into Celtic's general financial model of buying players and selling them on for big profits after 2-3 years of service for Celtic. I think also Celtic would be better to have a manager with experience, because I think coming into a team which is rather low in confidence, low in team spirit, with all the toxicity between the fans, the board, the club, the players, etc., in the background, I think you need to have someone who is a great uniter, a great motivator. There are some folk suggesting Ange Postecoglou would be a good alternative. I think he would bring experience. I think he would bring back a real Celtic style of football, a winning style of football, an attractive attacking style of football. And I think he would be fresh ideas and fresh mindset compared to Brendan Rodgers. However, I think Celtic probably in the end will go for one of these young, very promising managers such as McKenna or Duff or Keane. Although my personal preference at this time, if he's willing and wanting to come to Celtic, would be Knutsen of Bodo Glimt. So some talk of it being Ange Postecoglou coming back. I personally don't see Ange Postecoglou as a person who comes back to a job having been there before already. However, I do think he would bring fresh ideas, fresh mindset, and bring back the sort of attacking football that Celtic like, but also was clearly a style of football that won games and made the players happy and contented, and team spirit and team morale and team confidence under Ange Postecoglou was incredibly high. It might also convince some players like Dyson Maida and and Rio Hatate to stay an extra season or two. But either way, I think Celtic need to get this decision right, and I think if they do get the decision right over the course of November, December, and the first few months of 2026, I am very confident Celtic can overhaul the 8-point gap from Hearts and get themselves a cup or two at the end of 2025 and the start of 2026. That just about finishes things off for this video previewing the Falkirk match and one or two wee thoughts regarding the Rodgers departure and the way ahead for Celtic. As always, do feel free to pop your own thoughts into the comment section. As always, also do try and keep those comments and opinions and thoughts respectful, friendly, family-friendly language, etc. And if you are new to the channel, not yet subscribed, please do click that subscriber button. Keep the numbers pushing up through the mid 1400s. Towards 1500 would be a brilliant target to achieve by the end of 2025. And also, just a wee reminder, tomorrow evening, Thursday evening at 9 o'clock, there will be a live stream with All Welcome to have a wee chat, discussion, opinion sharing regarding the way ahead for Celtic, the possibilities for manager, the performances against Hearts and Falkirk, the lineup for Rangers, lots and lots of things to talk about in the Thursday evening live stream. So do pop in for that for a friendly chat amongst like-minded Celtic fans. So until the next video, which will be a post-match review of hopefully will be a good win for Celtic tonight over Falkirk. And so until the next video, good luck Celtic in beating Falkirk tonight, and hail hail!